Hi and hello to all listeners listening to this PPT, and I'm PM Harish Chandru from LA32031, and I'm here to present a PPT regarding our subject physiology under our Madam Olga Zalata in the topic classification of receptors and mechanism of reception. Hi. Now here we're going to see about classification of receptors. Receptors plays an important role in understanding the stimuli which comes to it. So it's widely classified into 7 classification based on the different characteristics. First characteristics is based on modality. It consists of monomodal and polymodal receptors. Monomodal receptors include exoreceptors and hemoreceptors, and polymodal includes introreceptors. And the second thing, depending on the nature of stimulus, the nature of stimulus which occurs to the receptors, classify the receptors into particular types, that is mechanoreceptors, which mechanoreceptors which attain a mechanical stimulus, and chemoreceptors which attain a chemical stimulus, thermoreceptors which attain a thermal stimulus. So according to it, it is a photoreceptors and nociceptors. And third one, by excitation mechanism, it may be primary and secondary. Primary is deals with the primary sensory, which is olfactory and tactile, and secondary deals with the secondary sensory, which is visual and auditory. And fourth one, by contact, means depends on the contact. Distant means without contact, vision and hearing, and with contact, skin. So these are the type of receptors which based on contact. And by distribution, by the general senses widely distributed, but the special senses limited only to the head. And the sixth one, by structure, the receptors may be unencapsulated or encapsulated and or special cells. So unencapsulated is an example of a pin, and encapsulated is an example of a corpuscles, and a special cells is examples of the rods, cones and hair cells. Thank you. The last important big and large classification is a classification based on location, which divided into two types, exoreceptors and interoreceptors. Exoreceptors consist of further three types, that is cutaneous receptors, chemoreceptors and telereceptors. Cutaneous receptors contain touch, pressure, cold, warmth and pain, and chemoreceptors comes under taste and smell, and telereceptors vision and hearing. And interoreceptors interoreceptors consist of two, that is vesicoreceptors and proprioceptors. Vestibuloreceptors have many types of receptors, and we have example of four, that is touch receptors in the case of heart, and baroreceptors in the case of blood vessels, and chemoreceptors in the case of gastrointestinal tract, and osmoreceptors in the case of urinary tract. And proprioceptors consist of receptors which has four types mainly, and that is muscle spindle, Golgi tendon organ, and corpuscles, and free nerve endings in the situation of muscle, tendon, filament, fascia and joints. Mechanism of reception. Interaction of receptor and sensory stimulus, and transduction is the process of converting energy of a stimulus into a neural activity, which is happening here. And now via this diagram we can understand how mechanism of reception is happening. And here this is the afferent neuron which carry information towards the CNS, and here is the sensory part, means sensory receptor. And now we're going to see something in a detail. The sensory receptor cell consists vesicle which with the transmitters, and it also contains the Ca plus channels. So when Ca plus influx happen, the vesicles with the transmitters are forced and are made to go into the terminals and to release the transmitters, and such released transmitters will interact to the receptor protein for transmission which is present in the axon terminals, and then action potential is created, and the direction is towards the central nervous system. So the stimulus is creating the action potential via receptors. Such a mechanism is called mechanism of reception. There is a big difference between the primary receptors and secondary receptors. In primary receptors, resting potential is directly converted into action potential, but in secondary receptors, resting potential is first converted to the generator potential and then action potential. As